One morning in 1784, Thomas Jefferson became America's first archaeologist when he decided to indulge his curiosity and unearth human remains from an Indian burial mound. Since that day, archaeologists, anthropologists, amateur explorers, and hobbyists have collected and sent thousands of boxes of indigenous human remains to museums and universities, often in the hope that they would become the objects of scientific study and help prove widely held beliefs about indigenous racial inferiority, or to prove insight into an alternate history that the first people in the New World were in fact European.
It was one of those things no one ever doubted. The first people on this continent were the Indians, period. No reason to believe otherwise. But 2 summers ago in the town of Kennewick, Washington, a skeleton turned up that could turn out to be the missing link between what we thought to be the truth and what actually is the truth. A truth, if it is the truth, that the Indians are not happy with and would just as soon leave well enough alone. The story of Kennewick Man started out like an ordinary murder mystery.
2 young men made news when they found a skull on the bank of the Columbia River near Kennewick, Washington. Suspecting foul play, they called the police, who thought the skull looked very old. They were right. Anthropologists excavated the area and found the full skeleton and determined it had been carefully buried along the river 9,000 years ago.
One of the oldest intact skeletons ever found in North America, a scientific treasure.
Prosopopea, prosopia, prosopopea. Now, a figure of speech in which an abstract thing is personified. Now, a figure of speech in which an imagined or absent person or thing is represented as speaking. Human remains are the kind of things from which the trace of the subject cannot be fully removed. Their appearance and presentation in the courts of law and public opinion has in fact blurred something of the distinction between object and subject, between evidence and testimony.
You could put this one in a crowd of Native American skulls. I mean, you could put him in with 100 of them and you'd still pick him right out of the crowd.
His skull shape falls way outside the range for modern Native Americans.
But I'm asking about the central question of concern. Who was here first? Doesn't he already challenge that?
He challenges it.
He challenges it.
He does.
Misplaced guilt is too heavy a rucksack to carry about. Our ancient roots on this continent give us position as good as or better than any, one that is not a settler mentality, that we are not newcomers, that we are not interlopers, that we are not evil conquering Europeans, but that in fact we have ancient roots here that give us a right to say we too are native peoples, we too are first peoples, we too are indigenous to this soil. We have our roots here. We will not surrender. We will not be swept from this place. But we will instead sink those roots, deepen those roots, not be transient, but instead truly inhabit this place.
Forensics is, of course, not simply about science, but also about physical objects as they become evidence. Things submitted for interpretation in an effort to persuade. Since objects do not speak for themselves, a person or a technology must mediate between the object and the forum to present it and tell its story. In U.S. court, the remains of the Kennewick Man are considered objects. Each bone and other piece of property was contested ownership. And only forensic anthropologists have the authority to speak for them, to tell their story. But for the Columbia Basin tribes, the Ancient One is an ancestor. His bones were unearthed from Indian land, so they speak for themselves.
We know what happened 10,000 years ago. I know what happened 10,000 years ago at home along the Columbia River because my teachings from my older people tell me how life was 10,000 years ago. And the scientists cannot accept the fact that just because it's not written down in a book, it's not fact. It's fact to me because I live it every day.
Functions as a trophy case to exhibit the settler colonial power's most prized possessions. Everything is turned into an object and a display, no matter what it is, no matter if it is a piece of the earth, an ivory tusk, the shell of a tortoise, or human remains. The entire museum's practice speaks of the terrible impulse of domination, a sort of indiscriminate domination. Nothing escapes the collector's impulse, as if our entire linear and accumulative culture collapses if we cannot stockpile the past into plain view.